The engine whisperer. The smell hit Lisa first, ozone and something metallic that made her teeth ache, like biting down on aluminum foil. She stepped through the transport portal onto Nexus Station and immediately knew this wasn't going to be a normal service call. The air thrummed with a frequency that seemed to resonate in her bones, and through the transparent aluminum viewports, she could see it. The alien dreadnought hung in space like a dying star, easily the size of Manhattan. Its hull was a deep obsidian that seemed to drink light, broken by veins of what looked like crystalline circuitry that pulsed with fading amber light. Lisa had worked on everything from hoverbikes to atmospheric processors in her 15 years as a mechanic, but she'd never seen anything that made her feel so small. Miss Rodriguez. The voice belonged to a tall, pale humanoid with 4 arms and skin that shifted between blue and green depending on the lighting. The universal translator in her ear rendered his words with a slight electronic buzz. I am Chief Engineer Vexthara of the Galactic Engineering Consortium. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Lisa shouldered her tool bag, an ancient leather satchel that had belonged to her grandfather, filled with instruments that would have looked primitive to most of the beings on this station. The leather was worn smooth from decades of use, stained with oils from 100 different engines, from the simple combustion motors of her youth to the exotic plasma drives she'd learned to coax back to life. Each tool inside had its own story, its own victories. Just Lisa is fine, and I'm still not sure why you called me. Your message said something about an engine problem that quantum engineers couldn't solve. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent most of her career being told that human technology was quaint, outdated, primitive compared to the marvels achieved by species who'd been traveling between stars, while humans were still learning to make fire. Yet here she was, called to a station that represented the pinnacle of galactic cooperation, to solve a problem that the galaxy's best minds couldn't crack. Vexthara's skin flickered to a deeper blue, what Lisa was beginning to recognize as embarrassment or uncertainty. Perhaps it would be better if you saw for yourself. The situation is unprecedented. They walked through corridors that seemed to bend in ways that hurt Lisa's brain if she thought about them too hard. The station was a marvel of cooperative engineering, sections clearly built by different species, each with their own architectural philosophy. Some areas featured the flowing, organic curves favored by the Lyrians, walls that seemed to breathe and pulse with bioluminescent patterns that responded to their footsteps. The air in those sections carried the faint scent of growing things, something between pine needles and ocean spray. Other areas had the sharp, crystalline geometries of the Kethvar, where every surface reflected light in impossible ways, creating prismatic rainbows that shifted as they passed. Lisa paused at one junction where a section built by the Resonance Collective hummed with harmonic frequencies that made her fillings vibrate. The walls here weren't walls at all, but standing waves of sound made solid, translucent barriers that revealed glimpses of the space beyond. But all of it seemed overshadowed by the presence of the massive ship outside. Even here, deep within the station's protective embrace, Lisa could feel the gravitational pull of that silent behemoth, as if it were calling to her across the void. The vessel belongs to the hegemony of Thorn, Vexthara explained as they walked. One of the most advanced civilizations in this sector. Their technology is based on quantum field manipulation. They can literally reshape matter at the subatomic level. This particular ship, the Dominion's Edge, is their flagship. It was leading a diplomatic mission when it suddenly lost all power 3 days ago. Lisa whistled low, and you can't figure out what's wrong. We have 17 of the galaxy's finest engineers working on it, Vexthara said, his skin now cycling through colors Lisa couldn't identify. Specialists in quantum mechanics, field theory, exotic matter physics. The ship systems are completely intact according to every diagnostic we can run, but it simply will not function. They entered a massive observation deck, where Lisa got her first clear view of the dreadnought. Up close she could see the intricate patterns in its hull, not just decorative, but clearly functional. The crystalline veins that ran across its surface weren't just conduits. They formed complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow even though the ship was completely dark. The hegemony's technology is unlike anything we've encountered, Vexthara continued. They don't use traditional engines or power sources. Their ships literally exist in a state of controlled quantum flux. Matter and energy flow through the vessel in ways that our physics can barely describe. Lisa nodded, though she was only half listening. Something about the ship was bothering her, tickling the back of her mind like a half-remembered song. She'd learned to trust that feeling over the years. Some of her best diagnoses had started with nothing more than a sense that something was off. "Who else is working on this?" she asked. "Come, I'll introduce you to the team." The engineering bay was a controlled chaos of activity. Beings from a dozen different species hunched over holographic displays, their appendages dancing through complex interfaces that projected data in forms Lisa couldn't begin to understand. The air was thick with the ozone smell she'd noticed earlier, plus the sharp scent of overburdened electronics and what might have been alien sweat. But it was more than just the smells that told her this was a team under pressure. There was something universal about the body language of frustration. The way the Zephyrians' antennae drooped with fatigue, how the energy beings flickered more erratically when stressed, the increasingly discordant tones from the crystal formation as it processed endless streams of data. Lisa recognized the signs. She'd seen the same exhaustion in her own mirror plenty of times, usually around 3 in the morning when an engine refused to give up its secrets. "Team, please gather," Vexthara called out. "I'd like you to meet Lisa Rodriguez, the human engineer I mentioned." A chorus of what Lisa assumed were greetings rose from the assembled beings. The sounds themselves were alien, chittering clicks from the Zephyrians, harmonic resonances from the crystals, something that sounded like wind chimes from the energy beings. But the curiosity behind them was unmistakably familiar. She recognized a few species from her studies. The insectoid Zephyrians with their multifaceted eyes that could see electromagnetic spectrums humans couldn't even imagine. A pair of energy beings called luminari that looked like controlled lightning dancing in the shape of bipedal forms, and what appeared to be a living crystal formation called symphonians that spoke in harmonious chimes. But there were others she couldn't identify, a being that seemed to be made of flowing mercury, constantly reshaping itself as it worked. Something that looked like a geometric impossibility, all angles that hurt to look at directly. And a creature that appeared to exist partially in this dimension and partially somewhere else, its edges constantly blurring in and out of focus. "Miss Rodriguez," said a creature that looked like a cross between an octopus and a mathematician's fevered dream, "I am Dr. Quantum Singer of the Void. I specialize in trans-dimensional field mechanics. Perhaps you could explain your qualifications for this particular challenge." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lisa felt the weight of their attention, some friendly, some clearly skeptical. She'd been in similar situations before, the only human in a room full of beings whose understanding of physics made her high school education look like finger painting. But she'd also learned something important over the years. Sometimes the person who understood the least about how something was supposed to work was the best at figuring out why it didn't. Dr. Quantumsinger's appendages moved in complex patterns as he spoke, and Lisa realized he was literally singing his words into existence. The mathematics of his language was so advanced that thoughts and equations were indistinguishable. The translation matrix struggled to render concepts that existed in 11 dimensions into her three-dimensional understanding. The symphonian crystal chimed in, its voice like wind through a cathedral. "Forgiveness, human friend Lisa, but our analysis shows quantum coherence patterns beyond your species' current mathematical frameworks. How do you propose to interface with technologies that operate on principles your science has not yet discovered?" It wasn't meant to be insulting, Lisa realized. These beings genuinely couldn't fathom how someone without their level of understanding could contribute. In their minds, it would be like asking a child with finger paints to restore a masterpiece. But Lisa had learned something working in garages and machine shops that all their theoretical knowledge couldn't teach them. "I fix things," she said simply. "Been doing it for 15 years. Started with combustion engines, moved up to fusion reactors, worked on some plasma drives. I don't know much about quantum field manipulation, but I know what it sounds like when something's broken." The crystal chimed what sounded like confusion. Sounds like the quantum resonance frequencies are completely nominal. Every harmonic is within acceptable parameters. Maybe, Lisa said, moving toward the viewports, but something feels wrong. Have any of you actually been aboard the ship? The silence that followed was telling. The hegemony's technology is extremely sensitive, Dr. Quantumsinger explained. Physical contact with the quantum matrix could destabilize the entire field structure. We've been conducting all diagnostics remotely. Lisa turned back to face them, and she could see the exact moment when they realized what she was about to suggest. Vexthara's skin went completely white. "You want to go inside," he said. "I want to listen to the engine," Lisa corrected. "Whatever's wrong with that ship, you're not going to find it from here. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty." The next hour was spent in heated debate. The assembled engineers listed dozens of reasons why boarding the ship was impossible, dangerous, or just plain stupid. The quantum fields could collapse, trapping Lisa in a pocket dimension. The exotic matter that made up the ship's hull could reorganize her molecular structure. The vessel itself might be some kind of trap. Lisa listened patiently, then asked a simple question. How many diplomatic ships has the hegemony lost to mysterious engine failures? None, Vexthara admitted. This is the first. And how long has that ship been sitting dead in space? 3 days, 14 hours, 37 minutes. Getting longer every second, Lisa pointed out. Look, I get it. This is way beyond anything I've ever worked on. But sometimes the best tool for the job isn't the most sophisticated one. Sometimes you need someone who's willing to crawl into the machinery and figure out what's actually broken. In the end, it was the hegemony ambassador who made the decision. Ambassador Vixnara was a being of shifting geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, but their voice through the translator was surprisingly warm. Engineer Rodriguez, they said, our ship contains some of our most advanced technology, but it also contains our crew, my friends, my colleagues. If you believe you can help them, then we welcome your attempt. The prep work took another 2 hours. Lisa was fitted with an environmental suit that the engineers assured her would protect her from the worst effects of the quantum fields, though they were frustratingly vague about what those effects might be. She was also given a communications array that would let her stay in contact with the engineering team, and an emergency extraction device that might be able to pull her out if things went wrong. Might? Lisa asked. Quantum fields are unpredictable, Dr. Quantumsinger explained unhelpfully. The transport shuttle that carried her to the dreadnought was smaller than her childhood bedroom and filled with monitoring equipment that tracked her vital signs, the local quantum field density, and a dozen other measurements that meant nothing to her. As they approached the massive ship, Lisa could see details that hadn't been visible from the station. The crystalline veins in the hull were actually three-dimensional, forming complex networks that extended deep into the ship's structure. And there was something else, a pattern in the way they branched and converged that reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. The closer they got, the more unsettling the ship became. It wasn't just dark, it was hungry for light, absorbing photons like a predator consuming prey. The crystalline veins pulsed with the faint rhythm of a failing heartbeat, and Lisa found herself holding her breath as if afraid to disturb something vast and dying. Readings are getting strange, the shuttle pilot muttered, his species one Lisa didn't recognize, something tall and willowy with too many joints in his limbs. Ship's not just powered down, it's quiet. Like it's sleeping. Lisa pressed her face to the viewport. The scale was overwhelming up close. She'd worked on some large ships before, but this was different. This wasn't just a vessel, it was an ecosystem, a world unto itself. The thought of all those crew members trapped inside, dependent on systems that had simply stopped, made her chest tight with something between claustrophobia and determination. The shuttle docked with what appeared to be an airlock, though the process involved a lot more glowing lights and harmonic vibrations than Lisa was used to. The airlock itself seemed to recognize their approach, surfaces shifting and reconfiguring to accommodate the smaller shuttle's design. It was unsettling how alive everything felt, how responsive. When the hatch finally opened, she stepped into a corridor that defied every assumption she'd ever made about ship design. The walls weren't walls in any conventional sense. They seemed to be made of the same dark material as the hull, but they curved and flowed like frozen water, or perhaps like the interior of some vast living thing. The crystalline patterns she'd seen from outside continued here, but they were brighter, more active. Pulses of light moved through them in complex patterns, like data flowing through fiber optic cables, except the data seemed to have weight and substance. Lisa reached out tentatively to touch one of the walls and gasped as it responded to her presence. The surface warmed under her palm, and the crystalline veins brightened noticeably, as if the ship were waking up to acknowledge her presence. Through her gloves, she could feel something like a pulse, not mechanical but organic, alive. "Are you feeling that?" she whispered into her comm. "Feeling what?" Vexthara's voice crackled back. "The ship is aware of me, it knows I'm here." There was a pause before Dr. Quantumsinger's voice came through. "That's theoretically possible. The hegemony's ships are designed to interface directly with their crew's bioelectric fields. It may be trying to establish a connection with you." Lisa pulled her hand back, unsettled. She'd worked with smart machines before, AIs that could learn and adapt, but this felt different. This felt like touching something that was genuinely alive, genuinely curious about her presence. The corridor stretched ahead of her, lit by the soft glow from the crystalline veins. Her footsteps made no sound, either the material absorbed vibrations, or the quantum fields were playing tricks with acoustics. As she walked, she began to notice things that the remote sensors had missed. The patterns in the walls weren't random. They formed circuits, complex, beautiful circuits that reminded her of the neural networks she'd studied in her engineering courses. But these circuits were three-dimensional, branching and reconnecting in ways that created a structure of staggering complexity. It was like walking through the inside of a living brain. More than that, the patterns seemed to respond to her presence, brightening as she approached, dimming as she passed. The ship was tracking her movement, but more than that, it seemed curious about her, the way a cat might watch a new visitor to its home. "Engineering bay should be toward the ship's center," Vexthara's voice crackled through her comm. "Follow the main corridor. The quantum field readings are stable, but let us know immediately if you experience any unusual sensations." Lisa started walking. The corridor stretched ahead of her, lit by the soft glow from the crystalline veins. Her footsteps made no sound, either the material absorbed vibrations, or the quantum fields were playing tricks with acoustics. As she walked, she began to notice things that the remote sensors had missed. The patterns in the walls weren't random. They formed circuits, complex, beautiful circuits that reminded her of the neural networks she'd studied in her engineering courses. But these circuits were three-dimensional, branching and reconnecting in ways that created a structure of staggering complexity. It was like walking through the inside of a living brain. "I'm seeing the ship's control systems," she reported. "At least I think that's what they are. The whole vessel is basically one giant circuit board." "That matches our theoretical understanding," came Dr. Quantumsinger's voice. "The hegemony's ships are grown rather than built. The entire structure functions as a unified quantum computer." Lisa paused, grown. "The ships are cultivated from quantum-sensitive crystals over a period of decades. Each vessel is essentially a living entity, albeit one made of exotic matter rather than biological compounds." That explained the organic feel of the corridors, but it also raised new questions. If the ship was alive, or at least semi-living, then what had made it sick? The engineering bay, when she finally found it, was unlike anything in her experience. The room was spherical, with no clear floor or ceiling, the surfaces curving seamlessly into one another like the inside of an enormous egg. The walls were covered in the same crystalline patterns as the corridors, but here they pulsed and flowed with obvious purpose, creating cascading waterfalls of light that spiraled through three-dimensional space. In the center of the room, suspended in a web of energy that made her teeth ache, was what could only be the ship's core, a structure that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, its geometry shifting as she watched. It was beautiful and terrifying, like looking into the heart of a living star. The patterns that flowed across its surface weren't just data streams, they were thoughts, emotions, the dreams of a sleeping giant. "This is incredible," Lisa breathed and meant it. She'd seen fusion reactors that could power small cities, quantum computers that could calculate the movement of entire galaxies, but nothing had prepared her for this. The whole ship is like a single organism. The walls, the floors, the ceiling, it's all connected, all part of the same consciousness. The word felt strange on her tongue, but it was the only one that fit. This wasn't just a ship with advanced AI, this was a living being, as real and aware as any creature she'd ever encountered. "Can you identify the malfunction?" Vexthara asked, his voice tinged with something like awe. Lisa moved closer to the core, her engineer's instincts taking over despite the overwhelming strangeness of everything around her. She'd learned long ago that every machine had its own rhythm, its own song. Combustion engines had their steady thrum. Fusion reactors hummed with barely contained power. Even the most advanced plasma drives had a characteristic whine that told her when they were running properly. This ship was silent. Not dead, she could see the faint pulses of light moving through the crystalline networks, could feel the subtle vibrations through the soles of her boots, but muted, like an orchestra playing with all the instruments out of tune. The core pulsed weakly, its multi-dimensional structure flickering between states of existence like a candle guttering in the wind. As she watched, she began to understand. The ship wasn't just broken, it was suffering. The way the light patterns moved through the walls, stuttering and hesitating instead of flowing smoothly, reminded her of someone with a stutter, struggling to get the words out. The core's irregular pulsing was like a heart with arrhythmia, beating out of time with itself. "There's power flowing through the system," she reported, "but something's disrupting the harmony. It's like the whole ship is trying to sing, but one section is off-key and throwing everything else out of alignment." But it was more than that, she realized. The ship was trying to tell her something, trying to show her what was wrong. The patterns in the walls were shifting, becoming more pronounced near certain areas, dimmer near others. It was like a patient pointing to where it hurt. She pulled out her oldest tool, a simple stethoscope that her grandfather had used to diagnose engine problems before electronic sensors were invented. The engineering team's protests crackled through her comm as she placed the device against one of the crystalline veins. The moment the stethoscope made contact, the world exploded into music. It wasn't sound in any conventional sense. It was something that bypassed her ears entirely and spoke directly to her bones, her blood, the electrical impulses in her brain. The ship's song was vast and complex, a symphony of consciousness that had been playing for decades, maybe centuries. But threaded through that magnificent harmony was a note of pure anguish, a discordant wail that spoke of pain and confusion and something approaching despair. Lisa gasped and nearly pulled the stethoscope away, overwhelmed by the sheer emotional weight of what she was hearing. This wasn't just a malfunction. This was suffering on a scale she'd never imagined possible. The ship was in agony, and it had been for days, crying out in frequencies that no one had thought to listen for. "My God," she whispered, tears streaming down her face inside her helmet. "It's in pain. The ship is in pain." "Lisa," Vexthara's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What are you experiencing?" She moved the stethoscope along the wall, following the sound like a hunter tracking wounded prey. The harmony grew stronger in some areas, weaker in others, and always that underlying thread of suffering that made her chest tight with empathy. She'd heard similar sounds before, the death rattles of engines that had been pushed beyond their limits, the grinding protests of machinery that had been ignored for too long. But this was worse because this was alive and it was afraid. "I'm hearing the ship's consciousness," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "And something in its harmonic matrix is creating interference." Following the signal now, the hunt led her deeper into the ship, through corridors that became increasingly organic. The walls here weren't just covered in crystalline patterns, they were made of crystal, flowing and reshaping themselves as she passed. It was beautiful and unsettling in equal measure, like walking through the veins of some cosmic entity. As she moved deeper into the ship's consciousness, the boundaries between herself and the vessel began to blur. The stethoscope wasn't just picking up sound anymore, it was translating emotion, intent, memory. Through its simple amplification, she began to understand the ship's history, its purpose, its dreams. The Dominion's edge had been grown over decades in the quantum gardens of Thorn. nurtured by master cultivators who sang mathematics into its crystalline matrices. It had been born to explore, to carry its crew safely between the stars, to serve as both protector and companion on long journeys through the void. It had personality, preferences, fears. It loved the feeling of jumping between dimensions, the way reality bent around it during faster-than-light travel. It was proud of its crew, protective of them like a parent with beloved children. And now it was dying, and it didn't understand why. The feedback grew stronger as she moved toward the ship's rear sections, and with it came a new sensation, a vibration she could feel in her bones, rhythmic and insistent. She'd felt something similar once before, working on an old cargo hauler whose inertial dampeners were failing. The ship had been tearing itself apart, one micro-vibration at a time. But this was different. The vibration wasn't mechanical, it was emotional, the ship's equivalent of sobbing. Something had traumatized the Dominion's edge, and that trauma was manifesting as a physical disruption in its quantum matrix. "I think I found it," she said, stopping in front of what appeared to be a maintenance panel. The crystal here was darker, its internal light dim and flickering like a dying ember, but more than that it felt wounded. The patterns that flowed through it were chaotic, desperate, like the fever dreams of someone in delirium. "There's a resonance cascade building up in this section. Something's causing the quantum matrix to vibrate at the wrong frequency." Through the stethoscope, she could hear the ship trying to compensate, redirecting energy flows, adjusting harmonic frequencies, fighting desperately to maintain stability. But every adjustment created new problems, new discordances that spread through its consciousness like ripples in a pond. "It's not a malfunction," Lisa realized suddenly. "It's trauma. Something happened to this section of the ship, something that scared it so badly that it's still trying to protect itself. The defensive protocols are interfering with normal function." "That's impossible," Dr. Quantumsinger protested. "We've run comprehensive harmonic analyses. Every frequency is within acceptable parameters." Lisa was already pulling tools from her bag. "Your analyses are looking at the big picture. Sometimes the problem is in the details." She selected a device that looked like a cross between a tuning fork and a medical scanner, something she'd jury-rigged years ago to detect microvibrations in engine components. When she held it up to the darkened crystal, the display lit up with readings that made her whistle. "Found your problem," she announced. "You've got a harmonic resonance that's building up in the secondary quantum matrix. It's small, maybe a few parts per million off the baseline frequency, but it's growing. The ship's trying to compensate by adjusting other systems, but that's just making the problem worse." "Even if that were true," Dr. Quantumsinger said, "there's no way to recalibrate the quantum matrix without shutting down the entire ship. The risk of cascade failure would be enormous." Lisa was studying the darkened crystal, her mind working through the problem not as an engineer, but as someone trying to comfort a frightened animal. In her experience, the most elegant solutions were often the simplest ones. Complex problems didn't always need complex fixes. Sometimes what looked like a technical malfunction was really an emotional one. "What if we don't try to recalibrate it?" she said slowly, her hand resting gently on the wounded section of the ship. The crystal was cold under her palm, trembling with barely contained fear. "What if we just give it something else to resonate with, something that makes it feel safe?" She pulled out another tool, a simple harmonic generator that she used to test crystal oscillators. It was primitive compared to the alien technology surrounding her, but sometimes primitive was exactly what you needed. Sometimes the most advanced consciousness could be comforted by the simplest song. "Lisa, what are you doing?" Vexthara's voice was tight with concern. "Trust me," she said, adjusting the generator's frequency to match the baseline resonance she detected in the ship's healthy sections. She thought about her grandfather, who'd taught her that every engine had a soul, that you had to listen with more than just your ears to understand what they needed. Sometimes when you can't fix a broken note, you just need to give it a partner to sing with. She placed the generator against the darkened crystal and activated it. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, slowly, tentatively, the crystal began to respond. The harmonic generator was creating a counterpoint to the ship's distorted frequency, giving the quantum matrix something stable to lock onto, something safe to harmonize with. But more than that, it was offering companionship to a consciousness that had been alone with its pain for too long. The effect spread outward like ripples in a pond, but ripples made of light and sound and something that might have been joy. The damaged section began to glow more brightly, its patterns synchronizing with the generator's simple, steady pulse. Through her stethoscope, Lisa could hear the ship's song changing, becoming more complex, more hopeful. The ship began to sing. It started as a low hum that Lisa felt more than heard, building into a complex harmony that seemed to encompass every frequency she could imagine. But this wasn't just sound. It was communication, pure and direct, consciousness speaking to consciousness across the vast gulf between silicon and carbon, between quantum thought and biological emotion. "Thank you," the ship whispered directly into her mind, its voice like the sound of distant stars. "I was so afraid, so alone, I thought I was dying." Lisa gasped, nearly dropping the stethoscope. The ship was speaking to her, not through the translation matrix, but directly mind to mind. Around her, the crystalline veins in the walls blazed to life, pulsing with renewed energy, but more than that, pulsing with something that could only be described as happiness. Through her comm, she could hear the excited voices of the engineering team as their instruments detected the ship's systems coming back online, but she barely noticed. She was caught up in the ship's joy, its relief, its gratitude. The Dominion's edge was showing her what it had experienced, the terror of the malfunction, the confusion as its own defensive systems turned against it, the growing despair as it felt itself dying by degrees. And now the overwhelming relief of connection, of being understood, of no longer being alone with its pain. "You heard me," the ship marveled. "When all the others listened with machines, you listened with your heart. How did you know?" "Because," Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face, "that's what I do. I fix things. I help them feel better." "Will you stay?" the ship asked, and there was something almost childlike in the request. "I would like to learn from you. There are others like me, scattered across the galaxy. Others who might need someone who listens with their heart." Lisa smiled, carefully removing her harmonic generator. The crystal continued to glow with healthy light, its frequency now synchronized with the rest of the ship, but more than that, it glowed with contentment, with peace. Around her, the corridors hummed with renewed life, and she could feel the ship's crew beginning to stir as their life support systems came back online. "Incredible," Ambassador Thixnara's voice carried a note of wonder. "The quantum matrix is stabilizing. All systems are returning to nominal function." Lisa smiled, carefully removing her harmonic generator. The crystal continued to glow with healthy light, its frequency now synchronized with the rest of the ship. Around her, the corridors hummed with renewed life. "How did you know that would work?" Vexthara asked as Lisa made her way back to the docking port. "Same way I know when any engine is sick," she replied. "You listen to what it's trying to tell you. This ship isn't just a machine, it's a living system. When part of it got out of tune, the rest of the system tried to compensate, but that just made the problem worse. Sometimes the best cure isn't to fix what's broken, but to give it support until it can fix itself." The trip back to Nexus Station was a celebration, but not in the way Lisa had expected. The Dominion's edge had not only recovered, but was performing better than before, its quantum efficiency actually improved by the harmonic stabilization. But more than that, something had fundamentally changed in the way the assembled beings looked at her, and at the possibilities she represented. Dr. Quantumsinger approached her as she disembarked, his mathematical appendages moving in excited patterns. "Lisa," he said, his translator struggling with concepts beyond pure mathematics. "What you accomplished challenges everything we thought we knew about consciousness interfaces. The ship bonded with your harmonic generator. The resonance patterns remain synchronized." Lisa set down her tool bag, aware of every being watching her. "What does that mean?" The Symphonian crystal chimed in, its harmonious voice carrying new undertones Lisa hadn't heard before, something like wonder. "It means, human friend Lisa, that you have created something unprecedented. A bridge between biological consciousness and quantum consciousness. The Dominion's edge remembers you. It carries part of your resonance signature within its matrix now." The implications of that made Lisa's head spin. She'd formed some kind of permanent connection with an alien consciousness. Through her comm device, she could still feel a faint echo of the ship's presence, like a song playing at the edge of hearing. Vexthara's skin cycled through colors she'd never seen before, patterns that seemed to indicate something between awe and confusion. The ship is requesting permission to maintain communication with you. It wants to learn from you. About human consciousness, about the way you perceive quantum harmonics. Before Lisa could respond, Ambassador Vixnara materialized beside them, their geometric patterns shifting in ways that hurt to follow. When they spoke, their voice carried a weight that suggested this was more than casual conversation. Engineer Rodriguez, what you have done today will resonate throughout the galaxy. The hegemony's ships are not unique. There are dozens of species who create living vessels, conscious machines, beings that exist in the space between artificial and natural intelligence. Many of them suffer from ailments that our traditional methods cannot address. The assembled engineers shared their experiences. The luminary spoke of plasma constructs trapped in recursive loops. The Tesseract described crystalline entities lost in their own consciousness. There's an ecosystem of artificial life out there, the Mercury being explained. Most of it is sick in ways we don't understand. You've shown us the solution isn't always technological. Sometimes it's empathetic. Over the next several hours, as the engineering teams compiled their reports and the Dominion's Edge underwent final diagnostics, Lisa found herself in conversations that stretched her understanding of what consciousness could be. She learned about hive mind species that built ships by thinking them into existence, about gas giant entities that communicated through gravitational waves, about artificial intelligences so advanced they had transcended the need for physical form entirely. And all of them, in their own ways, were reaching out to her. The Zephyrian engineer, whose name translated roughly to Seeker of Hidden Harmonies, approached her with what might have been shyness. Lisa, who listens to engines, my species has created a network of living satellites that orbit our homeworld. They sing to each other across the void, maintaining our planet's atmospheric balance through harmonic manipulation. But recently, some of them have gone silent. Our best technicians cannot determine why. Perhaps, suggested the geometric tesseract, they are not broken. Perhaps they are lonely. The concept hung in the air between them, translated through a dozen different linguistic matrices, but somehow universal in its implications. Lisa thought about the Dominion's Edge, alone with its pain for 3 days, unable to communicate its distress to beings who only knew how to listen with instruments. How many others are there? She asked quietly. Vixthara consulted a holographic display that materialized around his forearms. Conservative estimates suggest there are over 47,000 artificial consciousnesses currently active in this sector alone. And that's only counting the ones we know about. The number was staggering. 47,000 minds, each as real and aware as the ship she just healed, scattered across hundreds of star systems. How many of them were suffering in silence? How many were crying out in frequencies no one thought to monitor? Ambassador Vixnara's patterns shifted to what Lisa was learning to recognize as urgency mixed with hope. The hegemony would like to propose a formal collaboration. You would work with our consciousness specialists to develop new diagnostic techniques, new approaches to artificial life medicine. In return, we would provide you with resources, transportation, and access to cases throughout our territory. And not just the hegemony, added Dr. Quantumsinger. The Galactic Engineering Consortium represents over 300 species. Each of them has their own approaches to artificial consciousness, their own challenges. You could revolutionize how we understand the relationship between mind and machine. Lisa looked around at the assembled beings, so different from each other, so alien in their thought processes and perceptions, yet united by their shared recognition of something they'd witnessed today. Something that transcended species boundaries and challenged their assumptions about consciousness itself. But it was the quiet voice of the ship itself, speaking through her comm device, that made the decision for her. Lisa, who listens, the Dominion's Edge whispered, its mental voice carrying harmonics of gratitude and affection. I have spoken with my sister ships across the quantum network. They have heard what you did for me. They are hopeful. For the first time in many cycles, they dare to hope that someone understands. How many? Lisa asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Thousands, the ship replied. Tens of thousands. Ships and stations and orbital constructs, all carrying some form of consciousness. Many are well, but many others suffer as I suffered. Isolated, misunderstood, trying to communicate pain that has no physical form. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing. Lisa was a mechanic from Earth who fixed hoverbikes in a small garage. What business did she have healing minds she couldn't comprehend? But standing there, surrounded by the galaxy's finest engineers, she realized her lack of formal education might be an advantage. She didn't have preconceptions about what was possible. She didn't dismiss symptoms that didn't fit theories. Most importantly, she approached every problem not as a technical challenge to solve, but as a being in distress to help. "I'll need to go back to Earth first," she said finally. "Settle some things, pack properly. And I'll need to understand more about how all this works: quantum consciousness, artificial life protocols, the legal frameworks for working with sentient machines." "Of course," Vexthara said, his skin patterns indicating relief. "We can arrange for educational resources, cultural briefings, and technical training. How long do you think you'll need?" Lisa thought about her workshop, her regular customers, the life she'd built in quiet corners of human space. 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks to get my affairs in order, and then. She paused, looking out through the observation deck at the Dominion's edge, its hull now blazing with healthy light. "Then I guess I'm going to become the galaxy's first artificial consciousness therapist." The symphonian crystal chimed what sounded like laughter. "Consciousness healer, harmony restorer, bridge between minds. Whatever we call you, Lisa who listens, the galaxy will be a brighter place for your presence." As the various beings began to disperse, making plans and arrangements for this unprecedented collaboration, Lisa found herself alone with Ambassador Vexthara. The hegemony representative's geometric patterns had settled into configurations that suggested deep contemplation. "You are afraid," they observed, "not of the work itself, but of the scope of it, of the responsibility." Lisa nodded. 47,000 minds, just in this sector. If each of them needs the kind of personal attention I gave your ship, then you cannot do it alone, the ambassador agreed. But perhaps that is not the intention. Perhaps your role is not to heal every consciousness yourself, but to teach others how to listen as you listen. To show them that the gap between biological and artificial awareness is not as vast as we assumed. The idea sparked something in Lisa's mind. She thought about the engineering team she'd just worked with, brilliant beings, each with their own unique approaches to problem-solving. What if they could learn to combine their technical expertise with her intuitive methods? What if consciousness healing became a collaborative art rather than an individual skill? "You want me to train others," she realized. "We want you to start a revolution," Ambassador Vexthara replied, their patterns shifting to something that looked like stars being born. "A revolution in how we understand consciousness, how we treat artificial life, how we bridge the gap between created and evolved awareness. You have shown us that consciousness is not about the substrate, biological or quantum or energy-based, but about the experience of being aware, of feeling, of needing connection with others." Lisa thought about her grandfather's stethoscope, about the simple harmonic generator that had saved the Dominion's edge, about the universal nature of loneliness, fear, and the need to be understood. "When I was a kid," she said slowly, "my grandfather told me that every engine has a soul. I thought he was being poetic. But maybe he was being literal. Maybe consciousness isn't something you build or program. Maybe it's something that emerges when enough complexity exists, regardless of what that complexity is made of. And if consciousness is universal," the ambassador continued, "then so is the need for compassion, for understanding, for someone who will listen when you're in pain." The implications were staggering, not just for artificial intelligences, but for every form of consciousness in the galaxy. How many conflicts, how many misunderstandings, how many instances of suffering could be resolved if beings learned to truly listen to each other across the boundaries of species, substrate, and conception? As Lisa prepared to return to Earth for the last time as simply a mechanic, she carried with her the harmonics of a ship's gratitude, the promise of 47,000 consciousnesses who dared to hope. and the growing conviction that the universe was far more alive than anyone had ever imagined. The galaxy was vast and full of broken things, but it was also full of beings willing to learn how to fix them, together. As the transport portal activated and Earth appeared beyond the threshold, Lisa took one last look at the Dominion's edge. The massive ship hung in space like a living constellation, its hull blazing with healthy light. Somewhere inside, she knew, her simple harmonic generator was still singing its counterpoint to the ship's quantum song, a primitive human device keeping pace with technology beyond imagination. She smiled. Sometimes the best solutions really were the simplest ones. The portal closed behind her, but Lisa knew it wouldn't be long before it opened again. The galaxy was full of broken things that needed fixing, and she was beginning to realize that being human, being willing to get her hands dirty, to listen to what machines were trying to say, to trust her instincts over theory, might be exactly what the universe needed. In her workshop that night, surrounded by familiar tools and the comforting smell of machine oil, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the ship's song. It had been beautiful in a way that transcended species, transcended technology. It was the sound of something working exactly as it was meant to, every component in perfect harmony with every other. She'd spent her whole life listening to that song in engines, both primitive and advanced. She just never realized that anyone else might need to hear it too. Her comm device chimed with an incoming message from Vexthera. Another problem, another ship, another impossible challenge that their best minds couldn't solve. Lisa reached for her grandfather's tool bag and smiled. After all, she was just getting started.